Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biweekly Briefings with SFI. I'm Sarah Streeter, the Executive Director, and I'm honored to be joined by our special guest this evening, Dr. Senator Paul. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today.
Glad to be with you.
So Senator Paul, you have long been an advocate for repealing the 2002 AUMF, as well as broader AUMF reform, which is the topic we're going to be discussing this evening. Can you explain to us how it is that you came to champion this issue and why it has been a consistent priority for you ever since then?
You know, my father served in the Air Force for 5 years. My father-in-law was in the Air Force for 20 years. I have a nephew who's been in 20 years in the Navy. 2 or 3 of my wife's nephews are enlisted and have been enlisted and now are out of the military. I think of the military and our service in a very personal way, in the sense that I think it's the obligation of those who are in charge of policy, those who are in charge of war, that we see it in a very personal way, and that we are very, very careful about getting into war, and that we go about it in a constitutional way so we don't get involved in war when we shouldn't be involved in war. Our founding fathers saw it in a similar way. It was Madison who wrote that the executive branch is the branch of government most prone to war. Therefore, with studied care, we vested that power in the legislature. This was a big debate among our founding fathers. Who should declare war, the president or the legislature? And all of our founding fathers unanimously agreed, and they wrote into the Constitution that a president could not take us to war. This was because we had seen the sort of perpetual wars in Europe between brothers and cousins, and all the royalty of Europe was somehow related. They were related to the Russian royals as well. And they saw these wars as mainly wars where the poor people and the regular people fought the war, but they were started by the royals, who were all sort of related to each other and had these sort of squabbles among their family. So our founding fathers said, we're going to make it hard to go to war. It's not that we wouldn't have war, but that we would make war difficult. So the Constitution says, Article 1, Section 8, that Congress must declare war. Throughout a lot of our history, that's the way it worked. In World War II, Congress came and declared war on first Japan and then Germany as well. We got away from it a little bit after that. We had sort of what were being downgraded to police actions or kinetic action or whatever have you. And then we had wars such as Korea that weren't declared. Vietnam, we had sort of an indirect resolution, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, that many people who voted for it didn't think they really were voting for 10 years of war in Vietnam and what came after. Same thing happened when we get to modern times and we get to the attacks on 9/11. Our country was fairly unified. Probably the vast majority of people, including my father, who voted against almost every war, voted for the authorization to go to war after 9/11. But it was very specific. It said we would go after the people who attacked us, the people who aided, abetted, or helped them in the planning of this. That was a pretty specific resolution. We went to war, but the war drug on, and then the war had no limit. And then people began saying, oh, well, we're going to fight against people who are associated with the people who might have planned 9/11. So it became very tangential. And so war in Somalia, war in Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mali, all these misbegotten, far-flung places became justified under the 9/11 AUMF, or Authorization to Use Military Force. I think that was a mistake, and it took our eye off of what we had actually voted for in Congress. There are many people in retrospect that look at Afghanistan and say, you know what, we really accomplished our mission in the first several months, and then after that, the mission changed, and the mission became one of nation building after that. There are people, though, and this debate still goes on. We had Ryan Crocker come in, the longtime ambassador to both Iraq and then to Afghanistan. He said, oh, well, the mission never changed. It was always about going after al-Qaeda. But for the last 10 years, people said there was like 10 al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. There was no real threat to America in Afghanistan. It became about nation building. And in the end, I think even that was an abysmal failure, because, we had 13 young people lose their lives on the last day we were there, mainly because of a botched up withdrawal that included giving up the great asset we had, which was Bagram Air Force Base, something we could defend, something where our soldiers wouldn't have died. Now, 13 died and 20 were severely wounded, or 28, I think, were severely wounded in that bombing. But that never would have happened had we been at Bagram Air Force Base. But it also never would have happened had we left a decade ago, when we probably should have. So I do think it's important that we vote on whether or not we go to war, that an AUMF is important. But I think the AUMF of 2001 justifies no war of today. And I tell people, if you want to go to war somewhere today, vote on it in Congress. We have a whole new generation of people in Congress. We have a whole new generation of soldiers. Some of them weren't born before 9/11. We should vote. These are brave young men and women, and they deserve, to have us vote.
So it sounds like, from what you've explained, that from your vantage point, the return of constitutional war powers back to Congress would have a tangible impact on military families like mine and those in our community, that it may lead us to get into fewer wars of choice that ultimately fall on our family's shoulders to serve in. Does that sound like the type of connection between the policies you're advocating for and the on-the-ground lived experience?
Without question. And the ones that we've finally gotten enough to votes to repeal may or may not change the situation, but for goodness sakes, we should repeal them. One is the 1991 authorization for the first Desert Storm, and the other one is the 2002 authorization to go into Iraq. Now, the 2002 authorization, I would have never voted for. I think it was a mistake to go to Iraq, and I think it was not something that was in our national security interest. I think it actually destabilized the region, made Iran more strong, and actually made Iran more of a problem by getting rid of their main nemesis, which was Hussein. So I think it was an all-around bad idea to go into Iraq, but I'm all for repealing that authorization. I would go one step further, though. I would repeal the 2001 authorization. And people say, well, if you repealed that, how can you be at war in Afghanistan or Somalia or all these different places? There's like 24 different countries we're at war in. Not all out war, but military action. Soldiers die in Africa. Every month or so, a U.S. soldier will die in Africa. And my point is that if you want to be in Africa, if you think there's a war in Somalia that you can explain to the American public which side we're supposed to be on and why we're supposed to be there, vote on it. But I don't believe in any broad proclamation that just gives carte blanche power to the military to be everywhere. And so it should be hard to go to war, and we should have a debate. I want to repeal 2001 and replace it with nothing. What I would replace it with is the Constitution. And if you want to go to war, we have a debate and a vote. Now, I'm in the minority with that. The people who want to repeal it, some of the good people that are on my side on repealing 2002 and 1991, they want to replace it with what they call a tailored AUMF that might be better than the broad one we have. But when we looked at the replacement efforts of 2001, we thought that it would have authorized war in 24 different countries. So that to me is not very limiting. That's actually a very expansive AUMF. I would say that we have the right to defend ourselves, and that means there will be military presence in different parts of the world. If someone attacks an American ship, by golly, we should blow them out of the water, and that will include military effort. But if you actually want to have 1,000 troops in Mali, I think you should vote on that individually in Mali. What's the situation in Mali? Who's on one side? Who's on the other? Because it's often so confusing that it's difficult to even explain to people who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. Somalia, there's like 15 different tribes, and they've been fighting each other for, a couple of decades now. And it's not real easy to explain to people who you should be shooting and why you should be shooting them. And in that case, maybe we shouldn't be in Somalia. And so I think we should have individual debates. So I would repeal 2001, the 9/11 proclamation, the AUMF, and then we would just debate in the future from here on out. We would debate and Congress would vote when we need to go to war.
Before we get to the hard work of repealing or reforming 2001, first, as you mentioned, the necessary step is to repeal the 2002 and the 1991 AUMFs. We're speaking tonight, the night that we're speaking this week, the Senate floor is poised to take a vote on an NDAA amendment that would do just that, copying a bill that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has already passed. And so by the time this does broadcast, we'll know whether or not this NDAA amendment did in fact pass. And so I guess what I'm asking for you to share from your vantage point now is, are you optimistic that ultimately, whether the amendment gets passed or not, that this will be signed into law by the end of this year? And what are you telling your Senate colleagues in the meantime to encourage their yes vote?
You know, I first introduced the repeal of the 2002 AUMF, I think back in 2012. I reintroduced it in 2016, 2017. I forced votes on it, I think, at least 2 different times. Each time we lost. This time, I think we're poised to win. We won in committee. We have a bipartisan coalition. I think that there will be enough votes to get 60 votes to get this to pass, and I think we will repeal it. It is a victory of sorts. But people have to realize they use the 2001 to justify everything they're doing now. So it should be removed from the books, and it's a victory of bringing people together, bringing a coalition together, and it's important. We're set to vote on it probably sometime this evening if we ever get started. We've waited all day long, and they haven't done a thing, but they may get started sometime this evening. It may go late into the evening, but I think there will be a vote, and it's a good first step. But I'm a big believer that we should not let our enthusiasm wane for trying to fix the 2001 or repeal the 2001, because they will continue to do everything they're doing everywhere in the world, every military involvement, they will justify by 2001. I think that's inappropriate. I think that's a misinterpretation of the 2001 resolution, which was very, very specific. And one interesting thing about the 2001 is that it doesn't say the words associated forces anywhere in there. And for the last 15 years, they've been saying, well, you know, it's okay because ISIS is an associated force to Al-Qaeda. Well, it turns out they were a breakoff of Al-Qaeda and they hate each other. So ISIS and Al-Qaeda hate each other. So you want to fight ISIS, vote on it, have a debate and vote on it. But they don't do that. And so there is a real danger that this continues and they continue to justify everything through 2001. But we will need much bigger movement, you know, generating much more enthusiasm to do something about the 2001, because it's been like pulling teeth just to get rid of something they're really not even using.
And so on that note of maintaining enthusiasm, my last question for you tonight before we let you get back to it is, what is it from your vantage point on the Hill that military partners and families can uniquely contribute to this conversation? What is it that is most valuable for us to be doing in order to maintain the momentum you talk about?
I think the hard part about people who are active duty is that the soldiers, the men and women who are active duty, are limited in some ways as to how political they can be and what they can speak to as far as issues. I can tell you from meeting military families and being part of a military family that I think they are more conscious of how important it is to debate and discuss when we go to war than almost anybody else, because you're fighting the wars. Your families are fighting the wars. I think that message needs to be transmitted, because often the people in Washington promoting more wars, I think, are very callous to the people who fight the wars. But I think they are also draping themselves in the flag and saying, we are the patriots, we are supportive of the troops. When in reality, I think the troops and the families are much more nuanced on this. When you see your husband go off to war, you want him to fight for something that the nation has approved of and the nation is completely behind of, and that you consider to be worth your spouse putting their life on the line. And I think up here, they use the military and wrapping themselves in the flags to justify all war everywhere indiscriminately. And I think that that's a real problem. The hard part from your perspective is there's only so much you can do. I don't know what your limitations are as a spouse, but I know your spouse is limited. But I can tell you that in the name of our active military, many politicians up here campaign for endless war that I think many of the people fighting the war would have a much more nuanced opinion on and might not be in favor of.
Well, I couldn't put that better myself. And to briefly answer your question, there's a lot that spouses can do, and we're doing the hard work of spelling that out. So thank you so much,
Senator Paul.
Thank you for joining us, and best of luck with everything.